Because in that story, hydrogen is the magic fuel that keeps European industry green, competitive, and independent from unreliable suppliers. In the real world, the hydrogen market in the EU is basically flat. Total demand actually fell from about 7.5 to 7.4 million tons in 2024. Most of that is still old-school hydrogen for refineries and chemicals, not some shiny new green ecosystem. The flagship of the new era, renewable hydrogen from electrolysers, produced around 0.019 million tons instead of the 1 million promised at this stage. That's not a delay. That's another universe. Here's the part economists quietly fear. This gap is not a PR problem. It is a physics and money problem. The first hard constraint is price. Renewable hydrogen in Europe today costs roughly €8 per kilo. Hydrogen made the old way, from natural gas through steam methane reforming, is closer to €2. So your heroic green molecule is about 4 times more expensive before we even talk about transport, storage, or losses. Everyone in the system sees this. Everyone pretends not to. This number is the quiet part, said aloud. Now imagine you're running a refinery in Germany or a fertilizer plant in Poland. Your margins have been crushed by high electricity and gas prices since 2021. Your competitors in the US or Middle East are getting cheaper energy and, in some cases, subsidies. And Brussels tells you with a straight face, by the way, from now on, a growing share of your hydrogen must be renewable. Yes, the one that is 4 times more expensive. No, we don't know how you'll stay competitive. That's your personal growth challenge. This is the flaw you can't fix with PR. If you look at the structure of hydrogen use, the picture becomes even more ironic. Around 4.2 million tons still go into oil refining. Another chunk goes into ammonia and methanol production. These are mature, brutally cost-sensitive sectors. You don't just walk in there, throw them fuel that is 4 times more expensive, and expect them to clap. In fact, demand in the chemical sector fell by double digits compared to 2022. That's not decarbonization. That's industry quietly dying or moving away. From an angle no one shows you, this starts to look very different. Hydrogen is being sold not as a tool, but as a confession. We destroyed our old energy base and we have no plan, so we're going to brute force a new one with subsidies and wishful thinking. Let's go deeper into the plumbing. To get that green hydrogen, you need electricity, a lot of it. You run electrolysers, which basically split water into hydrogen and oxygen. If the electricity comes from renewables, everyone smiles and writes climate neutral in bold. But the regulator who wrote this nice report calmly warns, by 2050, the cost of power grids in Europe could go up by 50 to 100%. Grid upgrades, reinforcements, balancing, all of that gets folded into your tariffs, into your bill, into your factory's cost structure. So, structurally, the EU built a plan where the fuel is 4 times more expensive, the infrastructure to deliver that fuel becomes up to twice as expensive, and the underlying electricity system is already under stress. Then we act surprised that investors stare at these numbers and quietly walk away. You see the problem here, right? Here is where the story stops making sense. The Commission has already thrown more than €20 billion at hydrogen projects through various programs. On top of that, member states added their own support schemes. On paper, it's a triumph of green industrial policy. In practice, we have a few hundred megawatts of electrolysers actually connected and producing, a handful of pilot projects, and a target line that is disappearing over the horizon. And here comes the fun detail. Only 2 EU countries, Denmark and Ireland, have actually implemented the updated Renewable Directive rules that are supposed to govern all this. 2 out of 27. So Brussels built an entire strategy on a legal foundation that most capitals haven't even poured yet. Officially, this is called regulatory delay. Structurally, it looks more like 25 governments staring at the spreadsheet and thinking, if we actually implement this, our industry will kill us. This is the part no politician wants to explain on TV. So let's take a breath. Where does this leave us so far? We have a target of 6 gigawatts of electrolysers by 2024 and 40 by 2030. We have a reality of 308 megawatts. We have promised 1 million tons of renewable hydrogen by now and are delivering around 0.019. We have a fuel that costs 4 times more than the existing alternative, plugged into a grid whose costs are expected to rise by up to 100%. And this brings us to the one number that changes the entire equation, 7.5 million tons. That's roughly the total hydrogen consumption in the EU before the latest slide. It's a mature demand base. It has not exploded. It has not transformed into some brave new hydrogen era. It has slightly shrunk to about 7.4 million tons, largely because chemicals are in decline. The new uses in power generation, transport, futuristic applications are a statistical footnote at about 0.27 million tons. In other words, The entire heroic hydrogen narrative currently sits on a demand base that is shrinking in the sectors Brussels wants to keep and barely exists in the sectors Brussels dreams about. If you work in manufacturing or energy, you've seen this movie before. You know how it ends. Let's zoom in on the incentives. For the Commission, hydrogen is not primarily about physics. It's about narrative management. They need a flagship that says, yes, we destroyed cheap pipeline gas. Yes, we broke long-term industrial planning. But don't worry, here is a visionary plan. There will be innovation, leadership, and green jobs. Hydrogen is perfect for that. It sounds futuristic, smells clean, and most importantly, is not yet large enough for voters to see the bill directly on the monthly statement. For equipment suppliers, consultants, and parts of the financial sector, hydrogen is a dream come true. You get long-term subsidies, guaranteed margins, de-risked projects, and a client, the state, who is politically unable to say, stop. Officially, this is framed as strategic autonomy. In practice, it behaves like a subsidy pipeline. Here's where the experts in suits start sweating. If this bubble pops too early, public anger will be directed not just at Brussels, but at everyone who cashed in. For member state governments, it's more complicated. Some see hydrogen as a way to recycle their excess renewable energy or keep old industrial regions alive. Others sign the communiques in Brussels, fly home, and then quietly stall the implementation because they've done the math. From a Baltic perspective, watching this from Lithuania, the whole thing looks like a second wave of the same game we saw with gas. Common slogans, very uneven national risks. From your corner of Europe, does this look like strategy or managed decline with better PR? Let's zoom out for a second. Globally, Europe is not alone in talking about hydrogen. The US, China, Gulf states, everyone is playing with this toy. The difference is that others tend to start from cheap energy and then see what applications make sense. Europe starts from ideology and regulatory targets, then tries to force the energy system to obey. The American approach is simple. We have cheap gas, we have subsidies. If hydrogen works for some industrial clusters, fine. If not, we'll quietly pivot. The Chinese approach. We build capacity across the value chain, we capture equipment markets, and we'll decide later where to use it. The EU approach. We declare 40 gigawatts, we don't build a coherent electricity or gas backup, and we assume that market players will jump just because we wrote the number. This hidden mechanism, does it change how you see the whole system? From a distance, the picture becomes even less comforting. Because hydrogen is not isolated, it sits on top of the same structural issues that already hit Europe during the gas crisis. An overregulated energy market, high dependence on imports, ideological bans on some sources, and a political class that treats price signals as something rude that can be ignored. The optimism around hydrogen is used to mask a simple fact. Europe has not solved its core problem of expensive, unstable energy for households and industry. It has renamed the problem and attached colorful diagrams. From here, all the options are bad. The only question is who pays first and who pretends it's inevitable progress. Let's talk consequences. Take a mid-sized industrial company, steel, fertilizers, glass, paper, pick any energy-intensive sector in Germany, Italy, or the Benelux. Their electricity and gas bills have jumped over the past few years. Their labor costs are high. Their access to credit is getting tighter as rates rise. They're already asking whether to invest in Europe or quietly move production to the US, Turkey, or Asia. Now add a policy that says, in future, part of your energy input must come from a fuel that is 4 times more expensive, from a supply chain that barely exists, through infrastructure whose costs are predicted to soar. This is where the theory hits a brick wall. On paper, hydrogen should decarbonize heavy industry. In practice, the risk is that it accelerates deindustrialization. Plants that can't pass those costs on to customers will shut down or relocate. Plants that survive will demand more subsidies, more exemptions, more transitional support. The bill doesn't vanish. It moves to taxpayers and households. This is the moment a Brussels regulation stops being an abstract PDF and becomes a line on your heating bill. If you're watching this from Germany, your reality is already different from someone in Portugal. German industry feels the full weight of these choices. Southern Europe, with weaker industrial bases, feels them more through unemployment and weak wages. From a Baltic point of view, small economies like Lithuania get the worst of both worlds, imported high energy prices and limited ability to shape the rules. Now look at households. When regulators say that grid costs may rise by 50 to 100% by 2050, that's not a theoretical curiosity. It's a warning that the fixed part of your electricity bill, the part you can't save by turning off the lights, will grow. Networks, balancing, support schemes, stranded assets from earlier policy mistakes, all that will be packed into tariffs. Hydrogen, plugged into this system, becomes another force pushing costs up, while politicians keep promising that, in the long term, the new technologies will make energy cheaper. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. When someone tells you green hydrogen will reduce your bill, ask them to show the full cost stack, not just the electrolyzer brochure. Here's the part economists quietly fear. If hydrogen stays structurally more expensive than existing fuels for too long, but the policy machine locks into it, you end up with a permanent drag on growth. It's like adding an extra tax on energy and pretending it's innovation. Now, about the famous new hydrogen economy: jobs, innovation, exports. Yes, some new jobs will appear: engineers, maintenance, project management, retrofitting. But we have to compare this with what is being lost: a refinery that quietly closes, a fertilizer plant that relocates, a steel mill that reduces shifts. Each of those destroys hundreds or thousands of skilled jobs. Hydrogen-related jobs are highly specialized and clustered. The losses are widespread. The winners send nice pictures to Brussels. The losers sit in small towns and wonder why their kids are emigrating. Does this hidden side make you question the whole narrative? Let's zoom out one last time. Structurally, hydrogen could be a useful niche tool. For some sectors, some locations, some systems, it might make sense. The problem is not the molecule. The problem is the political decision to turn this niche tool into a central pillar before the basics are there. Cheap electricity, robust grids, realistic cost curves, clear demand. The EU jumped straight to the brochure phase and skipped the engineering phase. From the Baltic shore, this looks very familiar. We've seen the same pattern in other areas: ambitious targets, late regulations, fragmented implementation, and then endless attempts to retrofit reality to the slogan. It's not malicious. It's worse. It's incompetent. So, where are we now? We have a hydrogen strategy that is behind its own 2024 target by a factor of almost 20. We have real production of renewable hydrogen roughly 50 times below the level that was supposed to be already achieved on the way to 2030. We have costs that are 4 times higher than the incumbent technology and infrastructure that will become more expensive over time. We have demand that is flat or shrinking in key industrial sectors and barely exists in the glamorous new ones. And we have a political class that keeps repeating 40 gigawatts by 2030 as if it's a magic spell. From a systems perspective, this is not a transition. This is an experiment on a live patient, the European economy. If you caught the hidden angle here, good. If not, the elites are already billing you anyway. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and try to remember, slogans don't power grids. Systems do.